It's the Terry minus Jim show. Jim's still away. The empty seat awaits you, Jim. Hope the holidays are going well. It's Terry of the Jim and Terry Show, talking to you about things that I find confounding, things that I find don't make sense, and things that are odd and worth just talking about. One of the podcasts just recently, I talked about where you get your information often results in a demonstrable manifestation of that information, and that comes in intentions to vote. Where do you intend to vote? Well, the Republicans had their big debate the other night, and you would not know that the leading candidate is not there on stage. There were no attacks, there were no jabs, there were no knockout punches, there was no acknowledgement that the leading guy is 4 indictments, 91 charges, convicted of sexual assault, 4 businesses in New York State being delisted from their business certificates to conduct business in the state of New York. Things are, you would never know any of that stuff by the tone and tenor of the Republican debates. So where is all that going? The reality is that there are 4 states, 4 courts, 91 charges, and that's just what we know of so far against Trump. But in the world of the GOP, of the MAGA base, you would never know that any of that stuff is going on. And then what about Trump saying he would, well, in another day, I think he said, to be truthful and more accurate, he said people like Mark Milley, the retiring Joint Chiefs of Staff, would have been executed. Why? For disloyalty? So if you don't kiss Trump's proverbial posterior, his largesse, as I tend to sarcastically muse, then you're his enemy. You're either for him or you're against him. And that's the binary choice you have in the United States in the elections. You either vote Trump out or you're stuck with him. So get rid of the guy. Get rid of this whole notion that you can live in your own silo, a 30% plus bubble, and believe that your world is the world of reality. Meanwhile, everybody else is moving on. I'll give you another example of that disconnect between reality, of beliefs and where you get your information. I'm not a great fan of some of the mainstream media, but I trust them to do some digging and to vet their sources. So when NBC asks the Republican who's in charge of the soon-to-be launched inquiry into the impeachment of President Joe Biden, I agree with his question, which is, you flashed a slide on this speech and you said this connects to President Biden. The trouble is, this particular slide, this Republican leader of the inquiry into impeachment, is a timeline issue. It's dated June 2017, and Biden was not even a candidate, let alone in a position of political authority, either VP as in with Barack Obama as part of the White House admin of the Barack Obama administration, or he was not yet a candidate in his own pursuit of the White House. This was betwixt and between, but the timeline shows communication, and it implies that, of course, there's nefarious ne'er-do-wellness going on, but the date is a problem. So, NBC reporter gets up and asks a very pointed question. Can you explain to me how this information that you claim is a linchpin, so important and damning that it's going to take down in impeachment the President of the United States? And the answer was, well, next question. Yeah, next question. What? If you cannot explain what you're doing, you are a train wreck of an inquiry. The evidence should have led you to the point you are now going to pursue something, not we're going to pursue something and then hope desperately that some evidence we can throw together and make stick in some inquiry. Inquiry? I'm not sure. Inquisition, maybe. Yeah, stuff doesn't make sense. If you can't answer the question how this relates to criminality, then you are a sham. And that's what's going on. All right, let me take it to another thing that doesn't make sense. And that's Ukraine and Russia. And I know we're in a big campaign of media, who's going to dominate the fake news on both sides. Okay, so yes, I acknowledge there is information wars going on by Ukraine to manage their narrative, which is they're going to win. And of course, the Russian side saying they are going to be victorious for Mother Russia. And the two present their evidence, and it takes a critical look to see to what extent the evidence holds up to scrutiny. And that's what really it's all about. In this day and age of fake news, we do have to do some due diligence and can't just click, share, like, all kinds of things that don't make sense. In a previous podcast, I used or pointed to an ECOS poll that showed the more disinformation you consume, the more you tend to vote conservative. I think it was something like 80% of those who are going to vote conservative or PPC are, well, what do we say? Being indoctrinated by things in a silo of conservative misinformation, misrepresentation, and that goes complete all the way to Pierre Poilievre in the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada, and what they perceive and keep throwing out and hoping to stick to Trudeau. Now, there are gaffes, to be sure. The House Speaker with the Ukrainian SS officer was a gaffe, but it wasn't, it is bad. And apologies are needed, and the resignation was submitted. That's all good. That's what should happen when you make mistakes. And in genuine sincerity, you need to do what's right to make it right. And that's what's happened with the resignation of the House Speaker in Canada, and Trudeau gave an apology in Parliament. That's what's supposed to happen. In Russia, you could get away with all kinds of information bias because there is no competition for news. There is no way to vet the sources. It is simply a ministry of propaganda. When does it cross into a ministry of war criminality? And that's the question that doesn't make sense to me. You've got state-sponsored TV, whether it's RT or I think there's 2 or 3 other, there's a social media outlet arm of the GRU, the Russian Secret Service. And the tentacles of these operations reach to the United States, as they did entangle Trump. Russia. Yes, it's real. The Mueller report indicted several, I think it was nearly a dozen or more Russians. So things are going on. And when does it become criminality from propaganda? Well, you cross that line when your news anchors, you might as well look at the parallels with the United States far-right media, including Fox. And I'll get to them in a minute. Let's just say that the state-sponsored propaganda arms are inciting violence on a scale of unheard of proportions. Not even Goebbels could have done what the Russians are doing. And that is inciting violence against Ukraine. Speaking of flames in Ukraine, and that was just a clip I listened to this morning, firing the furnace that will make Russia the steel, tough and strong, better than ever. So we got to utterly annihilate Ukraine in order to make Russia strong. Is that the message? Okay, what does utterly annihilate mean? What does that look like on the battlefield? What does it look like as your tanks roll into a Ukrainian village? Well, it looks like lining up citizens and shooting them to death. It looks like raping and pillaging, and I said this in a previous podcast. This stuff is documented, being documented, and the International Criminal Court will be pursuing. When, this is the sad part about war, when the fighting stops. Only then can justice begin. That's a sad commentary on the state of the world. Russian propaganda, I don't get it. I don't get that you can get away with saying this stuff. And I would have used the SH blank T word, but for my corporate sponsors and their sensibilities of language. So, believe the stuff? No, absolutely not. And I'm raising this issue because I saw a tweet from Bob Ray, our Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, who's been very good at pointing out the not just inconsistencies, the terrible awfulness of the Russian campaign against Ukraine. So that sort of triggered, well, what else do you believe if you swallow this propaganda? I don't think it's going to do anything. And there's so much more to get into, but be careful of what you believe and where you get your news. I know you don't like mainstream media. It leans too far to the left, you say, but I will take a CBC over a Rebel News any day. I will take any Canadian network over Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson. Well, Tucker Carlson's not even with Fox. Speaking of Fox, a couple more lawsuits coming in, and they're big ones. Not just the Smartmatic 2-point-something plus billion, but there are some class action lawsuits by pension funds who say that they invested in Fox with goodwill, and that Fox, by spreading false news, fake information, promoting Trump's big lie, overturning the 2020 election, have caused their pension funds to decrease in value, and there are class action lawsuits against Fox. Rupert Murdoch, has he retired yet? It's another Murdoch who's in charge. Somebody's going to pay the piper for doing this kind of stuff on a major scale. And we haven't even got to Harlan Crow and all the rest of those moneyed billionaires who are influencing politics. Are they doing that in Canada too? Does right-wing funding have its source in American conservatism? Well, that's another bear to poke. The Jim and Terry Show, coming to you from the Hobbit Hole Studio. Bye-bye for now.